Welcome to this current UKFPO webinar. This one is entitled Preparing for Your ARCP, Time to Polish Up Your ePortfolio webinar. We will start by having some presenters. Then there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions relating to your ARCP and curriculum requirements. This session is for both foundation doctors and also for their supervisors. It's important that everybody is all on the same page and that we all hear the same message. My name is Fiona Cameron. I am the Foundation School Director in Scotland, and I am also the Chair of the Academy of Medical Royal College's Foundation Programme Committee. I'm joined tonight by three of our very lovely Foundation Year 2 doctors from across the UK. So I will let them introduce themselves first. So Jeffy, do you want to go first?
Thank you, Fiona. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeffy. I'm an F2 doctor based in the northwest of England. I'm also one of the 2 UKFPO fellows for this year.
Thank you, Jeffy. Now I'm going to introduce Heather.
Hello, I'm Heather. I'm one of the FY2 doctors based in Glasgow. I'm also part of the Specialised, formerly known as the Academic Foundation Programme, and I'm a co-chair for the Scottish Foundation Forum.
Thank you, Heather. And now welcome Wesley.
Hiya, I'm Wesley, one of the F2s in Dundee, and I have the joy of working with Heather as a co-chair of the Scottish Foundation Doctors Forum.
Thank you very much. And we'll be hearing from them shortly, and a huge thanks to them for preparing. It's important just to highlight that we have a Q&A function tonight. You'll see that in the band or the bar at the top of your screen, and you can post your questions. The questions will be moderated, and we will only be taking questions that are directly related to your ARCP requirements. So first of all, I'm going to just talk to you about what the ARCP is. It stands for Annual Review of Competence Progression. Every foundation doctor, in fact, every doctor who is in training, has an ARCP on an annual basis. It is usually a desktop exercise, i.e. you don't normally turn up in person, and your portfolio is assessed by at least 2 of your senior trainers, usually your foundation training program director, perhaps your foundation school director, but you'll be informed as to who is assessing your portfolio. Your portfolio will be assessed against the curriculum. That's the 2021 foundation curriculum. There are specific requirements that you have to achieve, and once you achieve these, you will then simply move into the next year of training if you're an F1, and if you're an F2, then you will be able to leave the foundation programme at the end of July, beginning of August, and embark on the next part of your career. So it's a busy time of year for everybody, and if there was one message that I can hand on to you tonight, is start early. If you haven't started now, tonight is the time to start. So I'm now going to hand over to Jeffy, who is going to present from a foundation doctor's point of view how to get through your ARCP. Thank you. Thank you, Jeffy.
Thank you, Fiona. I'm just going to take 2 seconds to share my slides. Please let me know if you can't see my slides. Feel free to shout out James in the background. But assuming that everyone can see my slides, I will introduce myself again. My name is Jeffy. I'm an F2 doctor, and I'm also one of the UKFPO fellows. So I'll be providing the perspective from a foundation doctor based in England. but all the information should be applicable to everyone across the 4 nations. So I think ARCP is that time of the year. It's exciting and scary at the same time. I think exciting because it's the time for you to showcase, your progression throughout FY1 and 2. It's scary because it may feel uncertain, not knowing whether you've done enough, you've populated your e-portfolio enough. So I think I'll use this few minutes to kind of give my high yield advice on what I think my e-portfolio should look like by this time of the year. So I'm only going to focus on really specific things. I'm going to focus on SLEs, the summary narrative, as well as the learning log. So amongst the SLE forms, there are multiple. There's mini KECs, there's the DOPS, CBDs. I'm sure all of you are familiar with these forms. And so I will instead focus on some of the less commonly used SLE forms, such as leader. So the leader form, and this is how it looks like on the Horus interface, is a form that's used to evidence clinical leadership. I think personally, I didn't start using this form until FY2 because I didn't think it was relatable or relevant to me as a foundation doctor. However, I do believe that this form is actually something that all foundation doctors can use. Of course, I think examples of clinical leadership, if you ask any person, you'll probably think something big, something like chairing a really big meeting or leading a national teaching program, for example. However, as you can see from this form, there are actually many settings in which you can use this form. Say in an acute setting, if you have been part of a cardiac arrest situation when you're on call and you found that you had to step up to a position of leadership, guiding the MDT until senior help arrived on the scene. That's an example that you can use to evidence your leadership skills. And there are other settings in which you can also evidence this, whether it's in the outpatient setting, on the ward, and in GP, which I'm currently on now. There are lots of opportunities where, the receptionist, the clerk, the nursing staff will come to you because you're sometimes the most senior, one of the most senior doctors in the practice. And so these are all opportunities to reflect on those moments of leadership. This is just examples of how I've populated it, but it's all about making it personalized to you and what you've learned from it. So, and I'm very happy to answer questions about the other SLE forms, but I do think that to keep it high yield, that's the only one I was focusing on. The next thing I wanted to talk about was summary narratives. I know that this is something that us as foundation doctors struggle with just because it's a bit vague as to what is expected of us when writing these summary narratives. And in fact, I didn't quite know about this until my educational supervisor back in FY1 had pointed it out to me. And so, but she was very good, she sort of made me get started on it. And I think the thing to say is that it's not a perfect summary, it's an evolving story. And I want you to think about this as how do you show your character development, if you will, as a new FY1 doctor, sort of insecure, uncertain about this clinical situation, about the technology in the hospital, and how you've evolved in that role into FY2 and so on. And during that time, how have you used all these SLEs, these learning experiences to showcase that progression? So I gave an example here of how I have written my summary narrative. And it's sort of a paragraph. This was during my Ops and Gynae placement. So I talked about how I've assisted in C-sections, assisted in clinics. I'm also one of the enhanced trainees. So I have time rotated in the community as well. And so I talked about how that made me appreciate the patient journey more holistically. So you can see how I've used my personal experience but also then tied that to all my SLEs to show that I have learned these things and this is how I can evidence this. And that's why I think it's really important to be selective about how you map your SLEs, because everything there should be there for a reason. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about is the e-learning for health modules. So on Horus, you can see here under curriculum overview, there is a little button on the top right where if you click ELFH, it sort of filters out a lot of extra learning modules that you can undertake. And the best part of it is that it maps directly to the FPCs or foundation program capabilities. And I think this is really helpful because, as you and I know, there is a minimum, in terms of 60 hours of core, non-core learning, but also you are expected to populate evidence to map to each of the FPCs under each of the HLOs. And so there are some of the FPCs that I know that we struggle with to populate, such as the one about managing personal well-being or speaking up when others are not behaving themselves, for example. And so it might be difficult to have real life SLEs or experiences to evidence that. And I think in those scenarios, you can show that you've undertaken extra learning by doing these e-learning for health courses and then just mapping it to the curriculum. So in summary, that's my whistle-stop tour through the high yield parts, in my opinion, of the ARCP process. Of course, there's a lot more, and I don't think this is what this webinar is for. This is to kind of give you high yield advice. But I think at this juncture, my top tip and advice for all foundation doctors is, one, if you haven't already, make sure that you start that tab now. Make sure you get all that feedback that you need early on. And secondly, to use resources like e-learning for health to supplement your learning. And then I think my other 3 points are more general advice. I think that as foundation doctors, we should be treating this e-portfolio like a logbook to demonstrate how we have achieved, progressed, and evolved as a doctor. And so I think we should try and play around with the portfolio platform, explore the different forms, try filling out the ones that are optional and less used. I didn't really go through any of the optional forms, but there are a lot of them. And I think it's worth having a read to see if you can sort of populate any of them, because I think what the ARCP panel is looking for is variety. And granted, they see so many portfolios. So I think if you want to stand out and make sure that you pass with flying colors, a good variety, a good mix of different learning experiences is definitely the way to go. And definitely be really consistent about it from the start. But I appreciate it is that time of the year where perhaps this advice is probably more applicable to the start of the year. As for clinical and educational supervisors, my advice would be to make every moment with the trainees, us as foundation trainees, count. I know that often the meetings with our supervisors, between the supervisors and the trainees, may seem a little bit like a checklist approach. We're having our initial meeting. Let's pull out this form. Let's, sort of hash out some personal development points and just let's get all these forms signed off and won't see you again until the end of this rotation, perhaps. I do feel like there are lots of golden opportunities for supervisors to impart, whether it's lived experience, career advice to the trainees, and even signposting us to other consultants, for example, who may be doing projects that are of interest to the trainees. And I've been very lucky in terms of getting an educational supervisor in F1 who was very invested in my learning. And she took all our meetings very seriously. We did the forms, but more importantly, she really asked me, what do you want out of foundation training and how can I help you get there? If it's about putting you in touch with the right person, I can try my best. If you need more pastoral support, I can also support you from that point of view. And I really appreciated having someone like that to turn to when I was feeling quite uncertain about foundation training, I wasn't sure what I wanted out of it, where it was going to take me after FY2. So I think for supervisors, I think just to kind of keep it brief, just make every moment teachable and engage with us. And that's it for me. Thank you very much, everyone. Happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you very much, JF. That's very helpful. And just to say, there's questions coming in. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentations rather than during. So please hold on, and your question will be answered at the end of the presentations. Thank you very much, JF. I'm now going to introduce Heather and Wesley, who are going to give their perspective. Just for everyone's information, in England, that you use the Horus portfolio. In Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales, we use the Turas portfolio. The forms are all the same. Everything you need to do, whether you're in England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, is the same, but the platform looks different. And Heather and Wesley work in Scotland, and they're going to talk to you about the Turas experience, but most of it will be relevant to everybody.
Thank you very much. We'll just get the slides up. That's perfect. So yeah, as touched upon there, we're going to be looking at things from a Turas perspective. As said, it is the same requirements as for Horus, but the platform is a little bit different and the way you kind of upload things are a little bit different. So it's just talking you through things that were useful for us. Could we go on to the next slide, please? So what is Turas? So Turas is touched upon. It's for all the devolved nations. It's also used in Malta as well. And it's used both by the supervisors and the FY1 and FY2 doctors to upload everything that you need for ARCP. It's really good for putting all the core competencies that we'll touch upon today. However, it can also be used for extra achievements as well. And this can be a really good way of anything that you kind of learn or experience during the foundation program to kind of put it all into one place, because quite a lot of people don't realize this or aren't aware that you can actually download the stuff at the end and after the foundation program. So that can be really useful for anything you go on to after FY2. But to highlight, even though things may look slightly different and there might be subtle differences, if you go on your foundation school's kind of web page for the specific guidance, all stuff at the end of the day that you need for ARCP is the same. Can we go on to the next slide? So for people that use Turas, this is hopefully a page that you've all been on at some point. It's a really good kind of platform, not just for the portfolio, but also you can have learning resources. It has documents that you might need to upload before and during employment, and things like study leave as well. On to the next slide. You can kind of see this is the homepage for the portfolio. For people that haven't used it much, when you first go onto it, it can be quite overwhelming. There's quite a lot of stuff there. It has lots of information, which is very useful once you're used to it. But I'd highly recommend at any point you get a chance just to click through all the different pages, get yourself familiar with what all the sections are, what is required, and also how it changes throughout the year. So you can see just faded in the background there's a progress summary. This is really useful for seeing where you are during the year. I've outlined in red there the sections for people who are slightly more new to Turas, the things that you should be focusing on to begin with. These are the core things that you need for ARCP, with all the other things like the leader and learn forms really good for kind of boosting that evidence. So looking at this, the majority of stuff that you will be doing to upload to your portfolio will be down on the forms section. I won't go into all of these in depth, but this is where you upload things such as your declarations at the start of each year, things like your prescribing assessment certificates, and then also things like kind of different clinical assessments that you'll be doing on each of your jobs and your tabs. Another thing that's slightly different is that you're encouraged to do for Scotland the Scottish Trainees Survey. This goes into the reflections and achievements section, and then the training section is where you have your core and non-core teaching. Next slide, please. So not going to go into every single section in depth, but just kind of for the high yield stuff, the things that are really useful to do is at the beginning and during the middle and end of each job. I find it really useful to go on the UKFPO ARCP's checklist. This has a really clear outline of all the stuff that's expected, not just on Turas, but on Horus as well, of the things that you should be thinking about uploading throughout the year. I tend to write my own list just so I have easy access to it, and it means I can tick it off as I'm going along to make sure the curriculum is fulfilled throughout the year. When you're sending any tickets through Turas, send as many as you can as soon as you can. Things like your tab especially, you may not get people responding to all the tickets, so you need to send more than you need. As touched upon earlier, aim to get your tab done as soon as possible. If you can, try and get it during your first rotation, but this rotation in the middle can be really good as well. That just gives you any time if you're struggling to get any feedback or need to do a repeat tab before ARCP in the third block. I'd also recommend whatever one that you don't do the tab in between the first and second rotation, do your PSG, which is quite similar to tab. You get a range of feedback. It's from a more kind of consultant-led level. And try and organize your quality improvement project early on as well, because that can take different periods of time depending on the project you choose. Upload any certificates, any surveys you fill out, or any teaching as soon as you can. It is much harder to try and find any evidence of this or remember what the contents of all the teaching was later on in the year. And also, I'll touch upon shortly, is check the FAQs. Turas is really good for this, and it'll help you keep on track. And if you can't find any answers to this on Turas or on the checklist, then you can contact your supervisor and director, and do this as early as you can, because that means they can work on sorting out any issues you might have. And next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Turas has this really, really good kind of feature in that every single page on the Turas platform has a little drop-down section. You can't quite see the contents of the answer for that here, but if you click on the drop-down for any of the pages, it should tell you what is expected for that section of the form. This is really good as well if you're not used to some of the other forms like Leader and Learn. They talk you through it, and it's really good ways of thinking about how you might boost your portfolio. Next slide, please. And finally, this is the most important part, whether you're in Horus or Turas, is linking for your curriculum. So linking is essentially is all the evidence you put up. You need to link it. This is what is looked at. This is what kind of performs the core of kind of what is looked at for ARCP. So I'll show you in a second what it looks like, but basically any ticket you upload, for example, you would do a clinical examination and this is signed up, you can then choose to link that up to 3 times to a capability which is what is used to show that you're making the curriculum. It's really important as well, and you will probably hear this several times throughout the year. The first sections of this also need to cover physical, social, and mental health. A really good way of doing this is if you're struggling to kind of see certain presentations, is use your reflections. Think about how, if you're seeing an acutely unwell patient, what the social or mental health implications of this might be. Use the other forms as well, not just the core ones I outlined there, because they can really, really help boost your portfolio and show that you're going beyond the level expected. And try and link as soon as you can, or regularly review at the beginning, middle, and before your end of rotation meeting to make sure things are linked up and you're getting enough links. And then use your summary narrative again to make sure you're covering everything. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of an outline of what a good process that we've found to be. Everyone does it a little bit differently, but this is quite a good way of making sure you're staying on track. Is at the beginning or just before the beginning of each rotation you go on to, there's a section on Turas called the Personal Development Plan. And this is basically a way you can either kind of keep it personal or discuss it with your supervisor, talking through what you're hoping to achieve in that rotation. This is a really good way if you use the UKFPO checklist to see, okay, this is the requirements I still need to make, or I'd like some more of, and this is how I'm going to do it. You then can think of these goals, and then throughout the year, opportunities will hopefully come up for you to kind of meet those goals through tickets. You would then create your ticket. You would choose to link it using the function on the shown on the screen there to the relevant part of the curriculum. And then the last bit that you really useful to utilize is called the summary narrative. This is basically your way of selling to your supervisor each block and at the end of the year how you've met the curriculum. A way I do it is I go through all my tickets that I have done that rotation, and then I put them into the summary narrative to make kind of tell a story of what I've learned and how I've learned it and how it links in. Not everyone does this, and you don't have to do this, but I find it really useful to kind of actually put in numbers to how you've linked. This not only keeps me right, but it makes sure the supervisors can see exactly what you've been doing. And I'll just pass on to Wesley, who will discuss some of the resources that are useful.
Thanks, Heather. I just wanted to spend some time highlighting a Scotland-specific resource. So all Scottish Foundation doctors have access to this, the Trainee Teaching Repository. You should have been emailed this to your NHS email, and you can just search in the email repository. It should come up with this page. To enter it, you select Go to this sway, and on the next slide, we'll have a wee screenshot of what it looks like. If you've not used it before, you'll be greeted by this page, which has a few different tiles. And then when you scroll down on the next slide, there's a wee countdown to ARCP, not to stress you out, but just to highlight how much time you have. And there's some helpful links at the bottom. And going on to the next slide, if you scroll back up, you're greeted with the tiles, and you can click through for different links. And the one that I really want to highlight is the core foundation learning topics. And when you click through to this, you're greeted with a variety of topics. So these are linked to all sorts of resources which you can use to supplement your core teaching. It's important to note that that's not a substitute for face-to-face teaching, but it's really to supplement and add more information if it's helpful. And on the next slide, we've got an example of the kind of resources that are linked in and how they're organized. And if you have any feedback on using this resource, then the team that developed it would love to hear it. And there's a feedback form just there.
Thank you very much to Heather and Wesley. And I think it's important to remember that the UK Foundation programme is a four-nation programme, and whilst everyone's achievements and competencies have to be the same, there's a really rich range of educational resource around for everybody. So thank you very much to both of you. I am now going to pick up some fairly dry slides that give you an overview of ARCP requirements. This is for both foundation doctors and also their supervisors. So if you just bear with me while I present my slides, I hope you can see this. So my name is, as I said, I'm Fiona Cameron. I'm the Foundation School Director in Scotland, but I am also heavily involved in the UKFPO, and I chair the Academy's Foundation programme. So actually, okay, so this is a slide that you will regularly see. This is just to make it clear that this is a UK Foundation programme and is supported by the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges, NHS England, while it still exists, Wales and Northern Ireland, which is NIMTA, and NHS Education for Scotland. So the curriculum is very broad. Foundation is an outcomes-based curriculum. And really, you should be able to achieve your curriculum outcomes whatever jobs you do, because these curriculum outcomes are generally based on the GMC's domains of good medical practice. So with this curriculum, we think about the patient at the centre. We think about the impact of physical, mental, and social health of our patients. And we know that as doctors, both newly starting doctors, and there's doctors who've been in the system for a long time, that it's very unlikely that just one of those impacts on the patient. Usually when they have a physical health problem, there is some impact on mental and social health. So it's important for us to think about the patient as a whole, and therefore this curriculum allows us to demonstrate that we understand that. It is across a variety of settings. Most people will do a community post. There'll be acute and chronic environments. Most of you will have some exposure to mental health settings, perhaps in general practice if you don't do a psychiatry post, and certainly you will see patients with mental health diagnoses in your acute placements. And we also must be thinking about health promotion. So the higher level outcomes, that's what you're going to be evidencing. And I know that Jeffy and Heather and Wesley have alluded to these. So there are 13. HLO1 is the doctor as a clinician. And underpinning that, there are 5 foundation professional capabilities: clinical assessment, prioritisation, holistic planning, communication, care, and continuity. HLO2 allows us to know how you fit into the team. So that's that transition from being a medical student into a fully fledged part of the healthcare setting. And there are foundation programme capabilities within that. And then HLO3 is the doctor as a professional, developing themselves as with lifelong learning, understanding the wider aspect of medicine, and understanding how medicine fits into the law and has some understanding of ethics. As a foundation doctor, you need to evidence each of these foundation capabilities. Absolutely nothing can be left blank. We will allow you to link up to 10 pieces of evidence for each of these. And in reality, the vast majority of your evidence will be in HLO1 and HLO2, and HLO3 may have slightly fewer. But if you have a blank, if you have an empty, no links, then you will not be able to progress through your ARCP. So it's really important to start thinking about the evidence that you've got and will you be able to link it. I can assure you that supervisors read this. Supervisors read the evidence that you submit to make sure that it maps. So for those supervisors out there, don't just look and have they got links, have a look and make sure that there are links to each of these HLOs so that the foundation doctor has provided evidence that they have met the HLOs. For those of you who are interested in medical education, and certainly for the supervisors, certainly this is why we do this. Obviously, we need to know that our foundation doctors understand things, they know things, and that's why we want them to do their core learning. So that's why we have to make sure that they've done their learning, they've attended their teaching, they've done the e-learning for health module, should they do it. We want them to demonstrate that they know how to do that. So that might be through reflective practice. And then we are all involved in doing simulation in our programs. So they will all get to do either ILS, ALS and F2 or equivalent. So we have to do some simulation. And then right at the very top, and that's why we focus on these SLEs, because that is experiential learning. That pulls everything together. So for the foundation doctors, this is why we ask you to do it. This is why we put so much focus on your SLEs, and this is your opportunity to show your supervisors that you know how to be a doctor, you have the underlying knowledge, you know how to examine, how to assess, and how to prescribe, and how to work in the team. So that's why we put the focus on it. So that's why we have no minimum, but that is why we say, do a good number of SLEs. Because that really shows that you are competent. It also allows your supervisors to give you feedback where you can do better. If there's areas where you haven't been doing so well, or you can just do better, gives you some more advice, things that you can progress to. And it's really helpful when you do this for application for specialty. So that's just why. So this is a really, really busy slide. And this is taken from the UKFPO's page. Essentially, I'm going to just go through it. in a bit more detail. So for F1, obviously you need your provisional GMC registration, and for F2 you have to have your full. So it's a 12-month whole-time training program, and that's something that we're not going to be discussing today. What you need to have is a satisfactory Foundation Programme Director's end-of-year report. In Scotland, it will be your Foundation Programme Director that does this. In England, it will be your Educational Supervisor. So the Educational Supervisors in England will do an end-of-year report, looking at the educational content of the portfolio. In Scotland, it will be the Foundation Training Programme Director who completes this. In order to complete, you will have 3 posts through the year, and you have to have a satisfactory educational supervisor's reports. You have to have a satisfactory clinical supervisor's reports. And for the supervisors, the clinical supervisor report focuses more on the foundation doctor as a doctor. What are their clinical skills? Do they have the required clinical skills, the clinical competencies, the clinical behaviours to meet the requirements? From an educational supervisor's report is focusing on, have they met the educational requirements, i.e. have they mapped to the curriculum? So have they been to their teaching? Have they done the required learning? The other thing that you must have is a satisfactory team assessment of behaviour. So there's a tab. You need to have at least one in F1 and at least one in F2. Now, the Placement Supervision Group Report, the PSG, again, you have to have one satisfactory for F1 and one for F2. There's a difference between the tab and the PSG. The tab is more about the behaviours, and there's a range of assessors that can be asked to use. And I'm not going to go through the numbers because that is information on the portfolio. But really the tab is about behaviours. It's about how the foundation doctor fits into the team. The Placement Supervision Group Report focuses much more on the clinical competencies. Do they have the good domains of good medical practice? So are they clinical competent? What areas do they need to develop in? Their prescribing, their assessment, their fluid prescribing, whatever it is. So tab, behaviours, PSG, it's about competency. And actually what we heard from our foundation doctors in the past was that the tab says if they're nice, and the PSG actually gives them information on their clinical competence, and our foundation doctors really value that. They crave that feedback. How do I know I'm a good doctor, and how can I be better? So as I said, moving on, satisfactory, all the curriculum outcomes, they have to be links. You can have up to 10 links per FPC. Any more than that, it will stop in both portfolios. And that's because we don't want people to overfill their portfolio. They want to have some discretion. Now, the other thing is we need you to see that there's satisfactory engagement of the programme. So doing core learning, non-core learning, and we're looking for a minimum of 60 hours, 30 of which must be core learning. It doesn't have to be face-to-face because we've got all sorts of other technologies now, such as Teams, etc. But there needs to be some element of direct contact with the trainer, whether that be face-to-face or on a Teams setting. The summary narrative, I know that Jeffy has alluded to this. What the summary narrative is there to allow the foundation doctor to think about what they have done. It's to critically appraise what they have done in the training year to say, have I met the competencies? And it's very similar to what is required for consultant appraisal. And it really is a way of you looking at what you have done, and it allows the supervisor to look at what the foundation doctor has done and say, have they met the foundation competency? So if I was doing it, I work in anaesthesia, so I might say something along the lines of, I feel I've met the competencies for HLO1 because I've passed my FRCA exam and I attend regular educational activity. I reflect on my work, and I have some evidence to show that I'm competent as an anaesthetist and do the procedures that I'm supposed to be doing. And I might write that in my portfolio. And that's what we're looking for the foundation doctors to do. I think I'm a good foundation doctor because I've assessed patients. I understand that if somebody has broken their hip, this will impact on their social care potentially. They may end up developing something like dementia. They may, or not dementia, but they may get confused. It may trigger a deterioration. And thinking about the physical, social and mental health. And therefore, I've done this across a range of jobs. Hence, I feel I have met the requirements. You may want to put some more specifics in about FPC 1, 2, 3, but essentially you're looking at saying, do I meet HLO1 and write it down? Do I meet HLO2, etc., and HLO3? Just want to comment on the PSA. The PSA is for F1s, and the vast majority of foundation doctors will enter foundation with the PSA completed and passed. But some of our foundation doctors enter foundation without the PSA, and that must be completed before they can achieve an outcome 1 in F1. I know that was a busy slide. Can I just please signpost both supervisors and the foundation doctors to the UK Foundation Programme ARCP checklist? There's a huge amount of resource, as I think it was Wesley or Heather who alluded to this. I think it was Heather, and you know it's incredibly useful, and it's incredibly useful for both trainers and for foundation doctors. And there's really no deviation from this. This is what is required. So some of the challenges for supervisors is when we get a portfolio where there is some difficulties. So if you see in your tab, or the foundation doctors tab, or the foundation doctors PSG, how are we going to deliver that feedback? So delivering that feedback in a way that is constructive and looking for a way to kind of close that loop. So if you've delivered difficult feedback, ask the foundation doctor to do something going forward to try and to allow them to demonstrate that things have been improved upon. It's an incredibly powerful thing when it comes to specialty application for a foundation doctor to show that things have maybe not been great at one point in some aspect, because none of us is perfect, and where they have learned and developed and improved. And that's one of the real benefits of having a portfolio that goes over 2 years. I hear regularly, how do I assess learning, and how do I assess portfolio development when I can't have a specific number of SLEs? That's a very difficult question, and we are no longer allowed to mandate a specific number of SLEs because the GMC have asked us to do that. We reckon that you are going to need, in order to evidence all of those FPCs, physical, mental and social health, you are looking at around the sort of 14, 16, 15, 16 SLEs. Now, that is not an absolute, but it is very difficult to achieve all the learning outcomes with fewer than that. We don't want people to do lots and lots and lots, but we do want them to be thinking about what they have done. Does it actually meet the learning outcomes? So you're meant to be critically appraising whether they've put the right SLE linked to the right HLO. So that's really important. For as supervisors, we need to make sure that within that portfolio, we see evidence of physical health, mental health, and social health. It's also important to think about how you're going to manage the PSG when a concern has been recorded by one or more respondents. If that happens, then it's important then you look through the portfolio. Is there something else that has contradicted that, where there's other evidence, or do you need more PSG? And it's important that to help our foundation doctors review and feedback on that summary narrative and give them guidance. So it's challenging to know how many SLEs is enough. If you divide us into 2 groups as people, Half of us would like a tick box to say you need to do this number, the other half don't. It's important that they have an appropriate amount of evidence, and I can't give you a number, and I won't give you a number, I won't be pressed to it. But I would say that the vast majority of SLEs will go into FPC 1 and some into FPC 2. And it's up to us as trainers to make sure that we review the foundation doctors' portfolio. They have put a lot of effort into this, and it's up to us to make sure that we do review it, we read it, we praise them where they have done incredibly well, because they do so well, they put so much into this. And also then, once they have done well, say, look, actually, if you take this to the next level, this is where you should be progressing. So that's really kind of exemplar practice. So this, one of the things that we always get asked about, what if the PSG is unsatisfactory? The PSG gives us feedback on the clinical care, quality and safety team working. And that is obviously the domains of good medical practice. And it's one of the areas that the foundation doctors can they can document excellence. So it's a bit like their boasting box. They can say, I have done 3 QI projects, I have presented a poster, I have done all these things, and the GMC are very keen that we allow within the portfolio a space for excellence. And it just gives us different information from that tab. So there are, I'm not going to great detail, but the feedback can be no concern, some concern, major concern. We can never have superior or excellent because for a variety of reasons, but really no concern is a good place to be. So it's important when you're reading the PSG, are you happy with it as a supervisor? Do you need any more information? Because that really should be pulling everything together to inform the clinical supervisor's report, so that you can get a valid and informative clinical supervisor's report. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to take I'm going to take some of the questions that where have we gone? Am I stopped sharing now? Thank you. So questions have come in from the audience, and I'm going to read them out. So the first question I've got here is that do we have to have a full QI project in F1, or can we just be involved? This person has had mixed messages. So I'll start and say that in F1, the curriculum asks for evidence of learning about quality improvement. In F2, there's an expectation that you will have completed or have heavily involved in a QI project. If you have done a QI project in F1, then that doesn't mean that you can't do one in F2, so you will still have to do one in F2. From a career point of view, the more QI work you do, the better. However, when we're thinking about the portfolio, you need evidence of learning about QI work in F1, and you need to have a project in F2. I don't know if any of Wesley, Heather or JFA want to add to that about QI work, because you all have been very busy doing QI work.
I guess just to kind of add to that, in F1, yeah, it's a very good opportunity to learn about it if you've not experienced it before. For F2, it's very useful as well to think about like long term what you're interested in, and kind of use that to identify a project. I think people find it a lot easier and they enjoy it more if they identify with their supervisors quite early on. I would like to get involved with this or lead this, and then that's kind of 2 in 1. You can use that long term, and then it also shows that you've been involved.
Thank you very much, Heather. So my next question that's come up is, what if we have audits for QIPs, QIPs that are in progress but not necessarily finished? I think if you're well underway with it, then I suspect your supervisor will be happy, but we understand that these things take time. My next question that has come in is for PSGs, does it have to be consultants only, or can it be F2 and above? And what minimum responses are required? So in general, for the PSG, we are looking for senior trainers. That could be senior nurses, senior clinicians, senior AHPs. It's generally not foundation doctors because we are looking at the quality of your clinical care. However, it could be appropriate that an F2 may have some input into some of the team working, but in general, it's about senior trainers looking at the quality of clinical care, and therefore it's not necessarily fair to ask your colleagues at foundation level to give an opinion on your clinical competence. And this question also asks about the minimum number of responses. There is no minimum. Well, one is the minimum because it has to be someone. However, we would advise that 3 would be good practice. So the next question is, do we have to have 10 things mapped for each HLO subsection? And how does it come across if we have under 10? So you can have a maximum of 10. If you have less than 10, then I would suggest that the quality needs to be good. We're looking for quality over quantity in foundation. In the past, we have had portfolios with over 1,000 links. We really don't want to see that many links, and that was in our previous portfolio. And this portfolio will cut you off if you put more than 10 in. So for each of the FPCs, so you can't have too many. Now it will stop you. So it depends on the quality of what you have. If you feel that what you have and that's under 10, but you have good quality information, physical, mental, social health, team working, lifelong learning, then less than 10 is fine. So the next question that has come in is there any point in doing a second tab during F1 if the first tab was fine with no concerns? So the answer to that is you only need 1 tab. I'm going to ask our resident doctors here if they would add to that. Would you want to have more than 1 tab? I don't know how you feel about that.
I think it really depends on the job you're doing. I think 1 tab at times, depending on where you are, can be quite difficult to get actually. Even if you work with 10 different people, it's not necessarily the case that everyone completes the form. Sometimes it can be useful to show, especially for things like allied health professionals, to kind of add a little bit more evidence to that. It can be sometimes used, but one does tend to take a while, so I don't know many people that have done more than 1.
Your supervisor, thank you, Heather. Your supervisor may ask you to do more than 1 tab. If there are concerns raised on the tab, then they will ask you to do another tab, and you may be asked to do a tab in each post to show progression. And that's okay. That's fine. The next question is about the leader and the learn form. These are optional forms. And they are not mandatory to be in your portfolio. However, we've heard from Jeffy how valuable the leader form is to map to your competencies. I would say particularly in F2, I think when you're starting to think about how you become a leader in foundation, in medicine. The learn form is the learning and reflection note. It can be used instead of any of the other SLE forms. And again, it is not an absolute requirement, but these forms can be used, but they are not mandatory. So moving on, I think we've covered the one about QI. Would it be too late to do a PSG in the last rotation? Now, that's a difficult question. I would say that if your PSG is in the last rotation, then that's quite high stakes, because if your PSG has any comments on it that are not ideal, that are unsatisfactory, then you've got no opportunity to remediate. So I'm thinking there that person hasn't done their PSG yet. You've still got time in this post to get your PSG out before the end. So I would suggest it's not ideal. It's not impossible. If it's great, but I would say do it early. Also, you have to have your evidence in quite early. in the last block. So I would suggest do it now and wouldn't leave it to the end. The Learn form we've covered. There's a question about the Learn form, and there's also another question about PSG. I'm not going to cover that because I said we don't need a minimum of 1, but ideally 3. Somebody has asked if there's a minimum number of reflections. I would say that you need several reflections, but the more reflections you do, the better quality your portfolio will be. Your summary narrative is a reflection. Okay, we've got time for a few more questions. So I've got one here. Can we have more than 1 PSG in a year? Yes, you can. Absolutely. If your supervisors are happy to send it out and people fill it in, then you're absolutely welcome to have more PSGs. And again, like the tab, your supervisor may ask you to have more than 1 PSG a year if there are some concerns. Now, I'm going to take one more question, and this question is about the SFP doctors. There is no specific SFP ARCP. If you are an SFP doctor, then you have time to develop your portfolio, but you are not assessed on this at ARCP formally. You'll get feedback, but it does not actually contribute to your ARCP. As an SFP doctor, you have to meet exactly the same requirements as a standard foundation program doctor, but you will have extra. So I see that we are now running out of time. There's one question I'm going to take, and I'm going to ask our foundation doctors if they can answer it just in the last minute. The question is, do you have any suggestions as to what kind of evidence can be mapped to FPC 9, which is fitness for practice, develop the skills and necessary to manage their own personal well-being? I don't know if one of you want to say what you did in F1 or what you're planning to do for F2, if you could share that.
So I know in Scotland, most of the areas do some form of kind of core teaching around well-being. That's a really good one to kind of show the core evidence. A thing that's becoming a little bit more popular in FY2 is there's different courses available, whether that's online or for your local health board. I know in West of Scotland, we do things such as peer support training. So that can be ways of linking to multiple parts of the curriculum. So like looking at your local opportunities that aren't just available to medics, but all sorts of staff have been away. A lot of people have done that, and supervisors tend to be quite supportive as well if you want to do any of that.
I have a suggestion as well. This is something that not in my hospital specifically, but I know that there are some hospitals where they organize well-being sessions or days out. For example, during the mandatory teaching, they actually took the entire afternoon off to go do like team building exercises together outdoors. One even had a trip to Alton Towers for the entire cohort of foundation doctors. Now, I'm not saying that is mandatory, but I'm sure the foundation doctors would not complain and in fact would enjoy it very much. So these are some ideas so these are happening. I'm not making these up. So yeah, I'm sure that as supervisors, if we have the opportunity, we should think, maybe give an idea and execute it, and also get some learning out of the experience.
Thank you very much. And I think that brings us very nicely to the end before Wesley and Heather asked me to take them to Alton Towers. So I just want to thank the UKFPO for hosting and supporting the IT for this webinar. I want to hugely thank Wesley, Jay-Faye and Heather for their time tonight and also the preparation that they've put in for this webinar. I also want to signpost everybody to the ARCP resources on the UKFPO website, so please use that. And last but not least, there's a fantastic resource on Humans of the Foundation programme, and it is hosted on the UKFPO pages. And I really want to encourage everybody to access this, because it's a wonderful resource. It's a wonderful piece of work, and we really should be celebrating it. So thank you very much, everybody, and good luck with your ARCPs.